Hello and welcome to Musicals with Cheese, a podcast where I usually try to get Andrew to like musical theater, but now we've got a different Andrew. In fact, we got the most famous Andrew we've ever had on, and the better Andrew. Today I am joined by composer, lyricist Andrew Lippa, who you might know as the composer of wonderful things such as John and Jen, Big Fish the Musical, I Am Anne Hutchinson, I Am Harvey Milk, The Addams Family Musical, Jerry Christmas, John and Jen, A Little Princess, The Wild Party, and You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. Andrew, we're so honored to have you onto our show. It really, really is an honor.
Hello, I'm honored to be on.
That's great. This is going to just be a free-form discussion where I talk with Andrew about both the things that he has done in the past and how he came to that point, as well as the things he's likely going to do in the future. So, Andrew, on the off chance that there's one person listening that doesn't already know who you are, give us a little background of who you are and just what you want them to know about you.
I imagine the people listening to this program may have heard one or two of my songs. I am a man, and I write songs, and sometimes I write whole musicals, and sometimes I write just the music, but most times I write the music and lyrics to musicals, and I've been doing it. I've been doing it for quite a while. My first musical was a little two-hander called John and Jen that premiered in New York City in 1995, and as you mentioned quite a list there of titles, and I've been writing musicals and producing records and writing songs for theatrical events and contexts for all these 23 years. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride.
Now let's talk about how you ended up in musical theater. Was it always something that you found driving to you, or did it seem like something you just kind of fell into naturally?
Well, when I was in high school, I was very musical from the very beginning of my life, and I sang, and I still do sing. I've sung on a few of my own shows. And when I was in high school, and in 10th grade, I auditioned for and was cast in a production of our high school musical, which was The Pajama Game. And I had a quandary, which was many of my friends had stopped after their bar mitzvahs, had stopped going to Hebrew school. We used to go to Hebrew school 3 days a week after school, or on a couple days a week after school, and one day on Sunday. One period on Sunday, once a week. And after people had their bar mitzvah, they would stop going to Hebrew school. And I kept going because I liked it. They had this thing where I grew up called Hebrew High School, and it was you could keep doing Jewish learning and get deeper into Jewish learning as you got older. And so I was enrolled in Hebrew High School, and I got cast in a musical, which was going to conflict. I was going to have to pick one or the other. And I went to my parents, who were very Jewish. They still are. And my parents, I said I wanted to be in the musical, and to my surprise and to my pleasure, my parents said I could quit Hebrew school, and they encouraged me to be in the musical. And that was the beginning of my love of musicals. I had seen a couple before then, but when I got into 10th grade, that was when it took off. And then when I went to college at the University of Michigan, I was a voice major my freshman year, and at some point during that year, my lifelong friend and not quite boyfriend, he became my boyfriend. He was my first boyfriend. It's Jeffrey Seller, who later went on to co-produce such little-known musicals as Rent and Avenue Q, and a little one that you might have heard of called Hamilton. And Jeffrey in college suggested that he and I write a musical, that I liked musicals and I played the piano, so I was a natural. And it all seemed very bizarre to me, but I said, sure. And we did write a musical together that we showed our teachers, and my professors were incredibly encouraging. I don't know what they saw, because if you heard those songs, you'd be like, those are terrible. But I wrote a musical when I was 19, and that's kind of how it got started. I found that when I wrote songs that I could dig into a deeper part of myself than I was digging into as a performing artist. And I love being a performing artist and have been a pianist and music director and singer an actor in various things all my life. I do love doing it, but I find that my real passion and my deepest feelings run when I get to write about stuff.
And as well, you are also one of the very illustrious composer lyricists out there. Was that always something that you strove to do, was writing music and lyrics, or did you start with music and then just started realizing, hey, I can do lyrics too?
Much like my life, now that I'm 54, I can say, I can look at some patterns in my life and see more of my life gone by than there will be life left to live. And I don't mean that in a morose kind of way, but it's just a reality. And I realized, like everything, it came slowly, and it came in different phases. I started out very much not writing text at all. I was a composer, and an unsophisticated one at that. I was just trying to figure it out when I was in college. And even though I had a very strong musical background and strong musical education and played the piano very well, I had never really had any formal training in music composition. I took a class with the Pulitzer Prize-winning, wonderful, great, amazing man and composer William Bolcom, who was a professor for many years at the University of Michigan. But he acted as a mentor, but I didn't take any formal lessons with him. And I got to New York, and I joined the BMI Musical Theater Workshop. I was fortunate enough to get accepted into that group, and continued to be only a composer and work with different people. And I wrote John and Jen with my friend Tom Greenwald. And again, I wasn't the lyricist on that project. And then I discovered a long form poem in the bookstore at the end of 1995 called The Wild Party. And I didn't have any writing partner who wanted to work on it with me, and I decided I was going to write The Wild Party as a musical and make it like Cats. I would set poetry to music and make it theatrical. And early in writing The Wild Party, I realized that there wasn't enough in the poem that was in the first person that said, I feel this, I want this. And I started writing my own lyrics. And showed a couple songs to my friend Jeffrey Seller. Again, all roads lead to Jeffrey Seller when it comes to making musicals for me. And I showed it to my friend Jeffrey Seller, who's also from Michigan. And Jeffrey said, "Who wrote the lyrics?" And I said, "I did." And all he said on the phone was, "Keep going. You should keep going." And cut to about a year and a half later, and Jeffrey Seller and his then business partner Kevin McCullum took out the professional option, and they actually were the commercial producers attached to The Wild Party when it got produced at the Manhattan Theater Club. So Jeffrey and Kevin were very instrumental in getting in producing The Wild Party with the Manhattan Theater Club.
I'm not gonna lie, it makes me so happy to hear like the origin story of how The Wild Party came to be and how personal it was to you, and also how you just kind of fell into writing the lyrics.
Yeah, I did. It's that thing I teach whenever I work with young people in writing musicals or writing songs. I always encourage them to go after the thing that they care about the most, and to go after the thing that makes them happy, that makes them feel something. And in the case of The Wild Party, I quit working. I basically had saved a little bit of money. Not very much, but I saved a little bit of money, and I thought nobody's going to ask me to write a musical. It just doesn't happen. Even it does happen, fortunately now for me, people ask me to write musicals, but you still have to go through a process, and also you have to really want to write it. So it has to be something that you really connect to the material, and that's often challenging. If you don't connect to the material, then I don't think it's going to be a very good show. And I really connected with The Wild Party and realized that if I didn't sit down and do it, it would not get done. And that in order to sit down and do it, I had to basically be a hermit. And I took about 6 months and just committed my days to writing that musical. And I walked out with about I don't know, 70 minutes of it, maybe 70 or 75 minutes of it. I had written a whole act one and a portion of act two, and got some support to put on a reading in New York City. And that's what started the process. And if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would have a career as a writer. It really took that kind of focus and that kind of dogged determination to push the mountain, the thing up the hill, because it's always pushing a thing up the hill, and somebody's got to push it.
And that's super inspiring to me, because there's no one telling you that you should do this. There's a guarantee that you're going to get this show, like, let me pay you. You just had that fire under you to do this, and you succeeded, and that's great.
Yeah, I guess I was very fortunate, and again, I do think I was deeply passionate about the material. So, there are people who've loved the Wild Party, and there are people who haven't loved the Wild Party, and the wonderful thing about the Wild Party, I read I don't know why I read a review recently, but I read a review recently. I tend not to read reviews, but I read one recently from a college production at Syracuse University that happened only just recently, and it was a really good review, and it was a fairly well written review, and the writer was clearly understood what the piece was trying to say, but also sort of underscore the fact that it's R-rated, that it's not for your grandmother, that it's really, really, not quote unquote normal musical theater fare, and that it has the potential to really upset people. And I was so thrilled. I thought, wow, something I wrote over 20 years ago still has the potential to piss people off. And I thought, wow, like I did something. I'm really proud of it. It's not the story is so simple. It goes from A to B, if that. And that wasn't what drew me to it. What drew me to it was what was underneath the characters and their motivations, and what kind of people they had become, or who they had hoped to be but didn't become. And that and I wanted to write a musical in a voice that I hadn't seen before, and I tried really hard to do that, and in some ways I think I succeeded. So I'm very happy. I love the Wild Party very much.
And I love it as well, and I speak for many others that love it too.
Thank you.
What Is It About Her is one of my favorite Broadway musical numbers of all time, and Make Me Happy is my alarm every morning.
Oh my gosh, that's quite a rude awakening.
I mean, it gets you up in the morning, really.
I imagine that's true.
All right, so what's the next professional show you did after the Wild Party? And as well, is it difficult to let those shows go, let your babies go to other creatives like directors and book writers and have their input on it?
Yeah, I had this wonderful period from 1995 to 2000 where I was feeling really most of the 90s because of I was learning how to do it and getting things on, and I had been a school teacher. I have a degree in education, and I had a full-time job until 1991, and then I started working in the theater, playing the keyboard and playing piano and anything related to that that I could do to make a living. But when the Wild Party opened, and it, some people, like I said, embraced it, and some people didn't, and it didn't transfer to Broadway. And there was another musical based on the same material that was on Broadway, and it was a very odd happening. And I got emotionally kind of crumbled by all of that experience. It was very, very challenging for me. And I didn't have another musical in my hopper. I had done Charlie Brown in the meanwhile, and that was a great, wonderful thing to do, and to write the new songs that I did, my new philosophy and Beethoven Day, and the new part to You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, and all the arrangements, etc. And I got nominated for a Grammy for recording the recording of that show, and that was all a wonderful experience that happened during the Wild Party time as well. But after the Wild Party opened, I was really sad, and I got rescued by my friend, designer and producer Heidi Ettinger, and the director Susan Schulman, who brought a musical based on a little princess to me with the writer Brian Crawley, who had written Violet. And I was asked to write music only on that project, and I decided to say yes because they were developing with Australian partners, and we got a trip to Australia. It was my first time going to Australia, and I felt like, well, I don't have to make as many decisions as I did on the Wild Party about the characters and the dramaturgy and the story and the action and all that. I can just write the music and have a writing partner, and that'll be pleasant. But there was a period from somewhere around 2001 to 2007 where I wrote several things. I wrote a musical called Jerry Christmas with Daniel Goldfarb, who's a wonderful, wonderful playwright who's now writing on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, I think, and as well as writing his own plays. But we wrote a musical that we developed a little that couldn't quite get off the ground. I wrote a musical called Asphalt Beach that was done at Northwestern University in 2006, and that couldn't quite get off the ground. I wrote the first act of a musical based on the Betty Boop cartoons with David Lindsay. A Bear was the playwright on that, and that didn't get off the ground. And then when I was at Northwestern University working on Asphalt Beach, the producer who was running that program at the time is a guy named Stuart Oken, and Stuart was producing a musical version of The Addams Family, and he took me to lunch and he said, would you like to write the music and lyrics for The Addams Family? And I asked him who else was working on it, and he told me it was Marshall Brickman and Rick Ellis were writing it, and I said, yes, when do I start? And so that was the beginning of another phase in my life. And I wrote those three other titles I mentioned, none of which have been recorded, none of which have been produced. Jerry Christmas happened at New York Stage and Film, which is a wonderful developmental place. And Asphalt Beach had a small production at Northwestern University. But after that, they haven't gone anywhere. And in a way, they were growing experiences for me. I wrote the lyrics and the music to both of them. It was an opportunity to continue to get better, and they led me to The Addams Family, which has been the most miraculous success, despite the fact that it didn't get the best reviews, and some people, again, it's basically the story of everything. Some people like it, some people don't. But the fact that The Addams Family is the most produced musical in North America 3 out of the last 4 years is a testament to how successful it has been and how many productions it's had, thousands of productions worldwide. And it just continues to grow, actually. We keep getting more and more people want to do it. And that was the beginning of a next phase. And so I kind of got past the sad Wild Party thing. It took me 5 or 6 years to kind of shake that off and jump back into, really making things that I really cared about and really wanted to get right. And
Addams Family is your first musical theater job where you adapted a full musical that was also a culturally engraved piece of the zeitgeist.
Well, Charlie Brown was a bit of a dry run. They didn't write the whole thing. So I did already have experience of dealing with famous characters. And again, I had told you I wrote the first act of a thing about Betty Boop. I think she's less famous. She's sort of known by what she looks like, but not so much by what her behavior is. And The Addams Family, yeah, that was the first time, and I didn't even let you get to the question, so sorry. Go ahead. What's the question?
No worries. Basically, the question is, do you find it difficult to musicalize things that are so ingrained into popular culture because there is that expectation coming in, and you feel like, my version of Gomez is like this, and maybe theirs won't be that?
Yeah, that was part of the challenge. There were a lot of challenges on The Addams Family. They were all challenges I wanted to take on, not the least of which was the size. It was a $15 million musical that I was writing the music and lyrics for, with very famous people at the center of it, and particularly Nathan Lane, who was just absolutely magnificent in every way. But at the same time, he's made, a big huge theater star. And there was a certain amount of, I had never had that experience before working with somebody that famous. And so there was a lot to learn there. And there was a lot to learn in terms of the audience's expectations and what they think they know about the characters because of the television show and the films. And we learned a lot when we did it in Chicago. We ran 8.5 weeks in Chicago for our out-of-town tryout. And while the show was still going through growing pains, it was still the second most successful out-of-town tryout up to that point, second only to The Producers, another Nathan Lane-led vehicle. And it sold so well that the producer was able to give us the amount of rehearsal weeks and time we needed to make the significant changes that we wanted to make in order to get it to Broadway. So it was just a really, really complex process. The directors were fired, and thank God Jerry Zaks came on board because he really was instrumental in helping right the ship. And the audiences really embraced the show. We were on the 10 days after we opened, there was an article about the Addams Family on the cover of the New York Times. And it said that, it didn't matter what the critics had to say, that audiences loved it, and that people were flocking to see the Addams Family. And that was true. It was remarkable how it was successful out of the gate, and people embraced it. And we had a pleasant run on Broadway and a really successful national tour. And then I've seen it. There are 3 recordings, one in Spanish, one in German, and one of course, in English. And I've seen it in Portuguese, Spanish, Swedish, German, Japanese, and it's been translated into probably 6 or 7 other languages, productions I have not seen. But it has really, really been a remarkable thing in my life. So I'm very grateful that it happened. And I don't imagine that I'm going to do it again. I don't know, but I don't think anybody, even if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, we've got the rights to," and, name another set of famous characters, I may yet. I don't know. We'll see how life goes. But it was a challenge that I learned a lot on, and I did it. And now I'm ready to do other things. And in fact, I followed that up with Big Fish. Only 3 years later, Big Fish opened on Broadway.
Yes, and that is another very popular film that you're adapting into a brand new medium. As well, you are working with the original collaborator on the film, John August, who wrote the screenplay for the film and has that connection to both the story and the characters. Did you find it hard to collaborate with someone that is really close to that and adapt it to a new medium, or was it much easier?
No, it's actually wonderful because John had before the book on which the film is based, before the book Big Fish had even been published, John was given a copy to read and decided he was going to make it into a movie. And so John knew the characters inside and out, and that was a very, very great thing to have in a collaborator who really knew who the characters were, and was also very, very eager to reinterpret Big Fish from the screen to the stage, and never ever walked in with a sense of, well, this is how it should be done because I did it in the movie. John was always open, and he's also incredibly musical. He plays the piano and has a wonderful bass baritone voice. And so we often had a great deal of fun learning the songs together. And he would be very, more really than any collaborator I've had. He had opinions about the music that he could back up with answers. And if he said he didn't think that was the right piece of music, he would say why. And I would say, okay, well, then I'll write something else. And it was, I think that collaboration was a very successful one. And again, Big Fish, despite its brief sojourn on Broadway, has had a London-based production starring Kelsey Grammer, and then it again is being translated into multiple languages. In fact, I'm going to Korea to see it at the end of this year, a production directed by Scott Schwartz that's going to run in Korea for several months, and followed by a Japanese production that's also going to run for several months, which several months doesn't sound very long by Broadway standards, but it's by South Korean and Japanese standards. That's a significant amount of time to run a show that people, particularly title people, aren't completely familiar with. So Big Fish, and also in what they call stock and amateur licensing, high schools and theater camps and all that sort of thing. It's just growing and growing, and more people are aware of it and want to do it. So I love that show, and the process was incredible, particularly. Not only with John, but with our two producers, Dan Jinks and Bruce Cohen, who had also produced the movie. So they had that experience twice. And like John, and then Susan Stroman, who really helped us, figure out exactly what it was we wanted to do with the show, and had just such a vivid imagination for it.
All right, before we wrap up, because we are getting to that time, I do want to talk about I Am Harvey Milk for a little bit. I'm just curious of the origin story to that project, how it came about, and how different it is from everything else that you've done previously and since. I
Am Harvey Milk came about because I got an email from Tim Seelig. Dr. Timothy Seelig is the music director of the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, and in 2011 he had only been in San Francisco for about a year running the chorus. And he had reached out to a group of, or the plan was at least to reach out to a group of composers and ask each of them to write a 5-minute piece based on their observations of Harvey Milk. And when he contacted me, I called him and I said, I am really humbled and grateful you asked me to write a 5-minute piece, but I don't want to write a 5-minute piece. I want to write a 60-minute piece. And he said, he wanted to know why, and we talked for a while. 2011 had been my father died in 2007, and my personal life had just gotten very jumbled following that for a few years. And in 2011, I had a really rough personal year. And as I was coming out of it, I got that email, and I did feel very I felt that email was very spiritually connected, and it felt very much like I was being led in a new direction, and or dare I say, pulled in a new direction. And that's for you Addams Family fans out there. And Tim said that the commission was with 9 other choruses across the country, and that they'd have to approve the idea of me writing the whole piece. So he spoke to them, got back to me, said, yeah, thumbs up. And I then had that, oh my God, now I've got to write it feeling. And I realized I had a few fixed things. One was I had a chorus of 300 men, and they stood still for the most part. They did some choreography, but they can't move on and off. They're, too many people, and they're there and they're on the stage. So that had to happen. And I wanted there to be some kind of soloists, and built my version, which had somebody playing Harvey Milk, somebody playing a young version, a child version of Harvey Milk, and a woman character who played for this amalgam of women in Harvey Milk's life. And then I realized I didn't want to write a bio musical. I didn't want to write something that was chronologically in order, because the movie Milk had been so wildly successful and also just so good, and I didn't want to compete with that. And so I decided I was going to pick that year, or almost a year in his life, when he was on the Board of Supervisors in San Francisco. He had been elected to start at the beginning of 1978 and assassinated in November of 1978. And I structured a 12-movement work, which represented the 11 months he was in office plus a prologue movement, and then developed it in New York. I wrote it and wanted to hear it, so I pulled together a group of people, and we did it in a rehearsal studio, and I invited 50 or 75 people, including my friend and colleague Bruce Cohen, again, who had produced with Dan Jinks, had produced the movie Milk, and Bruce wanted to get involved and has been involved ever since in I Am Harvey Milk and its follow-up Unbreakable, which we did just a year ago, and not even a year ago. And I played Harvey Milk in the reading, and it was kind of a test. I was curious, like, to see, should I do it? Tim Seelig said, we think you should do it. And I said, I don't know. Let me test it out in New York in January. The premiere was in June of 2013. And I did it in the studio. And the first thing that Bruce Cohen came up to me and said, I want to be involved. And then he looked at me and goes, and you're going to play Harvey, right? You're playing Harvey, right? And it was very sweet. And I said, yes, I'll do it. I'll do it in San Francisco. And then I ended up doing it. We did it with 550 singers at Disney Hall in Los Angeles. We did it with 700 singers in Denver as part of the Gay and Lesbian Association of Choruses, and 5,000 people in the audience. And I did it with Christian Chenoweth and the Orchestra of St. Luke's at Lincoln Center in 2014. And so I Am Harvey Milk has been a big departure and a wonderful change to write something that's deeply theatrical and interesting to me, but not a traditional, quote unquote, traditional musical.
And also Unbreakable, as well as I Am Harvey Milk, are both available on iTunes and all the other forms of music. And it is absolutely incredible. I highly recommend it. Fantastic job, Mr. Lippa. Really, it is truly fantastic work.
Thank you. I'll be doing Unbreakable in Austin, Texas, the 19th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 17th, 18th, somewhere on there, in May. And it's being done by 10 choruses across the country since the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus premiered it. And then Bruce Cohen, my frequent colleague and friend, and I are pulling together a production team, and we're going to be doing it in New York City, hopefully in June of 2020. And that will be more on that soon when I can say.
Now, here's the little craft question. As a lyricist, do you have a set of rules for your lyrics? Like, they have to all be perfect rhymes? Or is it more, like, free-flowing, like, if it feels right, it feels right, and it doesn't really matter if it's, like, always perfect rhymes?
Both. I think perfect rhymes, it's... My rule is this. It is... I learned it from Frank Lesser, actually, not from him personally, but something I read about it, which is that lyrics are a train on a car on a train, and a boxcar on a long train. And when you're sitting at the train stop and you watch the train go by, if you miss one of the cars, if the car it's moving, let's say it's going to the right, it's moving to the right, and if you focus too long on one car, when you go back to the center and your head goes back to the center, you've missed some because they're moving at a certain pace. And lyrics move at a certain pace depending on the song, at different paces for different songs. And if you get tripped up by anything, then whether it be rhyme or logic or definition, if you use a word that people don't know, and that's not to argue that you shouldn't use words that people don't know, but it's not like a book or a poem where you can stop and look at it and look it up. You can't. It's going by in front of you. And so for me, that is the key for lyrics, is that they go by at a certain pace, and you only get one chance to make that impression on the audience. And if they miss it, then you have failed. So that's up to each individual lyricist to decide what they think their audience can comprehend.
All right, for my next one, how would you describe the difference between writing a comedic song and a dramatic song, and how you go about them? Which one is more easy? Which one is more of a challenge? I'm just curious.
Comedy is much more scientific, and I'm not the first person to say that. There's an architecture and you know, my new philosophy, I'll say, or the old-fashioned love story from the Wild Party. You have to figure out what the punchline is, like the way you tell a joke. You have to what is the end? What are you getting to, and how are you telling the whole story of the song, and where are the laughs? You know, laughs can't come. It's really not a funny song if it's not a funny lyric if the laughs are coming from behavior, unless the lyric is about the behavior. And behavior can be funny, but it's dependent on the actor and the director. And the goal is to make the words themselves funny, for me at least, when I'm writing an out-and-out funny song. That's the answer to that question. I think writing dramatic, quote-unquote, songs that don't have it's tricky. Funny songs, you get feedback right away. The audience tells you if it's funny because they laugh, or worse, they don't. And then you're like, well, that's not funny. And after you hear it go by twice and nobody laughs, you're like, well, that's clearly not funny, no matter who sings it. And I learned that from Nathan in particular, Nathan Lane. Like, if he sang a lyric and it wasn't funny and Nathan Lane couldn't get a laugh, I'm like, then it's not funny. And so that was a good lesson working with Nathan. Got a lot of good lessons. But a song you mentioned, What Is It About Her? You know, What Is It About Her is, I wrote, it never changed. I wrote it like that in one sitting. I wrote that lyric all first, and then I wrote a piece of music that went with it, and it never, like, that was that. And so in some I Don't Need a Roof from Big Fish, same. It just, in 3 hours, I wrote I Don't Need a Roof. And whereas My New Philosophy took 3 days. And the bigger, like, crazy thing, lots of things happening in a song like One Normal Night, that whole sequence in the Addams Family, that literally, I think that took me 3 weeks to make that sequence, because I had to figure out how it went from the beginning to the end and how it all made sense and involved everybody and still felt like a song.
All right, now here's the last question, and it is the most generic question, the one that everyone would expect me to ask, but I gotta ask it. What advice would you give to anyone coming up in the musical theater world trying to be a composer or lyricist, much like you?
Right. Don't wait for somebody to, you know, they told us that they were going to commission us, or they were going to give us a production, and then they never answered us, and we sent it to the theater, and they didn't put it on, or they told us maybe next season. I'm like, I don't care. Write another one. Stop sitting around. Don't expect anybody to do anything for you, and put your own show on. I did that with write a show that you can put on yourself the first time. So do it with 2 or 3 or 4 actors, because you can put on your own show with 2 or 3 or 4 actors. And that's what I did with John and Jen. And that's what Jason Robert Brown did with Songs for New World. He started just showing those songs off in cabarets and clubs and start putting a show together. My friend Benjamin Scheuer, who wrote and starred in The Lion, that's a one-man show. He was able to just show it to people because he was in the room. And that was his first musical. So that's my advice. Write, and put your own show on.
All right, that was a fantastic interview, Mr. Lippa. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to say, spread to the audience, send them to, make them download, anything like that?
Oh, just be kind. Just be kind. People are out there making all kinds of things. I'm the president of the Dramatists Guild Foundation, and it's my great honor to serve writers across the country who make plays and musicals. And it's taught me that my job is not to judge things. My job is to support. My job is to help others to grow their thing. And if I don't like it, well, who cares? I don't like
lobster. That doesn't, some people would think that's ridiculous, but I don't like lobster. So I'm not going to go talk about how much I don't like lobster, that other people shouldn't eat it. Just be supportive. If you're making musicals, if you know people making musicals, if you want to make a musical, just be kind. It doesn't hurt.
Well, Mr. Lippa, thank you for coming on to our show. Thank you for schlepping down to our level and chatting with me on this podcast. It really means a lot.
Well, thanks for taking the time, and I really appreciate it.
And that concludes our interview with Andrew Lippa. Thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe to us on iTunes if you haven't already. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, all of that. We also have a Patreon where we'll have more interviews coming out, as well as the usual Musicals with Cheese show. We'll have a normal episode coming up this Friday that I'm really excited about, and it's going to be really great. So thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time on Musicals with Cheese.